Now to take this further, we are being joined by James Jackson, a journalist and political analyst. James, good to have you again. No surprises from Paris at all, but fear and uncertainty seem to be the mood in the country. How is the far right going to cobble up a coalition in the coming days?
I think what's important to note is that this is the first round of the French legislative elections. So the Front National have obviously reached a high point in their electoral support, almost double what they achieved in the last election, legislative election. And what's really striking is that they came within the top two places in almost every constituency in France, winning many historically working class seats, as well as middle class and even wealthier seats. Or at least coming in second place there. So what's really interesting isn't in my view, the coalition that the Front National or the Rassemblement National are going to put together. It's how the two other blocs, President Macron's bloc, centrist bloc, and the so-called Popular Front of the left, united together, are going to decide in the next election. There have been cases in which members of the centrist bloc have said they will stand aside to let the left win. And of course, the left leader, Jean-Luc Mélenchon, said yesterday that in cases where they came in third place, the left bloc would stand aside. So who wins in the next round is going to be dependent on large part on cooperation and collaboration between the other two blocs, because there are so many so-called triangular elections in the constituencies where the vote's being split three ways.
So James, are you essentially saying that there is a chance that France might not see a far-right government?
I think it's likely that that they will put together a coalition, but the question is, will the Front National get a majority?
Right.
And the main thing that could be stopping them is cooperation between Macron's force and Mélenchon's force.
Right. James, I've been speaking to a few of the voters within France, and there has been a constant mood of change, that the voters are looking for change in France. I want to ask you, what is it? Like, rather, which one is it? Have the centrists gone horribly wrong in France, or are the far right promising something right?
I think it's hard to look at Macron's government and particularly his decision to call this legislative election after a resounding defeat in the European elections and say that he's done well. Macron is an excellent figure on the international stage, but domestically he is much, much more controversial. A lot of French people are quite fed up at things like the pension reforms. Even though Macron's government's been good at keeping down inflation and unemployment, there are many French people who feel like culturally, France is taking a direction towards being more, there's a lot more, immigration is quite high, and this is a huge sense of culture war in France. And in fact, even some members of minorities are now voting for the Front National. But I think this is more a question of what are the, it's more a question of dissatisfaction and how the Front National have managed to capture the mood of dissatisfaction rather than going to the left. Many of the voters are going to the right, but we should remember the left did very well in this election as well. Right. So really it's the centre failing to hold, Macron being good at making promises, but seemingly unable to keep them or unable to convince voters that he has kept them. And Marine Le Pen being actually a very competent political spokesperson and putting forward their message with the PM candidate Bardella, who, the Front National has appeared to be more moderate in style, if not in policy, because, the policies which you just listed are actually quite radical. Right. But it seems like many voters want these populist solutions right now.
All right, James, very quickly, do you think Emmanuel Macron's gamble of calling for early elections was worth it as things stand at the moment, or do you think there is a long game he has in mind?
That's the question, really. To what degree is Macron thinking in terms of chess and in thinking in terms of his opponent's next steps? There is a tendency, Macron has called himself Jupiter or he is popularly referred to as Jupiter, and he says that journalists don't understand his thoughts because they're too complex. So people are questioning, did he know that this was going to happen? Is this Macron's plan? It's entirely possible that he thinks the far right won't be able to make this legislative election a success when it comes to governing, and that this will mean that his candidate can win in the next presidential election. But I think we should be sceptical as well. I think we should say it's entirely possible, and in fact it looks likely that he's made a catastrophic, even historic error in calling these elections at a point when dissatisfaction was so high and where Marine Le Pen's force had such political momentum behind them.
All right, James, thank you so much for getting us all those insights. Good to speak to you as always.
Thanks for having me.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.